Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for our spring update from the Whale Sanctuary Project. Charles and I are very happy to have you here. Charles, as you know, is our executive director, and I'm Lori Marino, the president of the Whale Sanctuary Project. Today, we want to give you some exciting updates and address some questions. If you have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and we are going to try to get to as many as possible in this hour-long webinar. So let's get started. Last summer, 2023, we learned of a really urgent situation going on at Marineland Antibes in France. There were a family of 4 orcas there. And the family consisted of Wikie, Keijo, and Moana. And Wikie's 2 sons, and Inuk. And there were 4 up until last year, and now there are only 2. Since then, Moana, who was only 12 years old, passed away, and Inuk recently died as well. So we're left with Wikie and Keijo there, a mother and son. And I'm going to let Charles tell you about some of the legislation that has come forth in France that is leading to our preparing for hopefully receiving Wikie and Keijo into our sanctuary next year.
Well, thanks, Lori, and welcome everyone. I'm pleased to be here along with Lori to answer your questions today and talk a little more about this plan that we have, as well as the rest of the work going on in the sanctuary. So as we learned about these animals, and these Wikie and Keijo have been certainly were born in this park. Their parents were captured, or Wikie's parents were captured, and they've been in this facility for their whole lives. So France, some years ago, introduced legislation that really prohibits keeping whales and dolphins in captive facilities in marine parks going forward. This legislation becomes active in 2026. So that put pressure on Marineland to move these animals in advance of that date. And last year, they announced a plan to move them to an aquarium in Japan. Subsequently, we've heard it could possibly be China. Now, given the legislation and the spirit of the legislation, there was an outcry in France from the public, from advocacy groups, and from people around the world, putting pressure on the French government to really find another solution. So we've been in conversation with the French government, with the ministry, really since the beginning of the year, discussing what those options were, along with one of our colleague organizations, One Voice France, in France. And through those conversations, we talked about the sanctuary in Nova Scotia as a possible site for them to be moved to. Along with other groups that are interested in this, the French government in March announced that they would open a period of time in the month of April for the submission of what they described as expressions of interest. So certainly we developed a very extensive dossier of information that we submitted to the government in April, and they are taking the month of May and likely into the early part of June to evaluate our expression of interest and others they've received from other organizations. And they have stated that they intend to make a decision about the future for these animals in June, and that they'll make that public. And they've also told us and others that Marineland, the owners and operators, have agreed to abide by the decision of the government, even though they are actually the owners of the animals and could potentially make a different decision. So with that, what we've seen is that the opportunity that exists is one that requires us to move expeditiously forward. So we've developed an accelerated plan to welcome these orcas. And the key part of that plan is that we would install our bay pen in advance of completing the whole sanctuary, so that in 2025, we could welcome the animals to a bay pen that's very sophisticated, and we'll describe it to you and show you some images of it in the course of this webinar. And that bay pen really gives these animals a way to acclimate to the new environment while we're installing the perimeter net around the whole 100 acres of sanctuary. Now, you might think that a bay pen is therefore a small space. So let's look at what that actually is as we go forward. So with the next slide, Lori, we show you a little bit about what the comparison of our bay pen design is in terms of size as compared to the facilities that Wikie and Keijo are now in. So in the upper right corner, as you're looking at the screen, we've got a comparison where the black circle represents the size of the bay pen, and the gray circle represents the main pool area at Marineland Antibes. So roughly, the bay pen is roughly 3 times, a little less than 3 times the size of the main pool at Marineland. Now, the larger circle over on the left compares our whole sanctuary area for the whales to all the pools at Marineland Antibes. And you can see that that's just remarkably larger. Now, interestingly, we have 2 pictures, but actually there's a third comparison on the page. And that is that the bay pen area is actually almost twice the size of all the pools at Marineland Antibes. So that gives you a sense of, yes, we're talking about a bay pen to start. And that bay pen will be a place where they could stay for 6 months, perhaps even a year, while they acclimate to the environment as we complete the rest of the sanctuary. So with the next slide, we can show you a little bit about what we mean by a bay pen. And before Lori jumps in, because she will momentarily, to show that and to say that the orcas are by no means to scale in that bay pen.
You said it for me.
I did. I knew it was coming. And so with this bay pen, this is 400 feet by 150 feet. Really, it's comprised of 2 octagon-shaped netted areas. There's no net bottom. The nets on the sides go directly to the seafloor so that the orcas and other whales that we would have in the bay pen in time or over time can acclimate to the seafloor, can get used to the flora and fauna. In that sense, it gives them as much of an environment that we have in the whole sanctuary while being within the bay pen. Also, the other features of this bay pen, and it's not unlike what we built for Keijo many years ago, but far more sophisticated. And so in this case, we have a medical lift in the center of the bay pen that can be lifted up so that we can do veterinary work with the orcas. We also have a slide out in that area so that on a day-to-day basis, all of the animal husbandry work that we need to do hands-on with the whales, they slide out as they're used to doing in Marineland. They slide out onto the platform and our team can work with them. We also have 2 isolation pools that we can move 1 or more whales into to have independent care with them. And on the platforms, we also have storage facilities. We have overnight bunks. We have toilet facilities for the staff. And there's a walkway around all of the bay pen so that the training team, veterinarian team, animal care staff can work with the whales at any point around the whole circumference of the bay pen. In addition, we'll be able to move feeding stations to different areas. And when the medical lift is not in the up position and we're not using it, they have the run of the full 400 feet of space, and they have access to all of it, but we can also divide it in half. It's a very flexible space for all of our work. Now, the lower picture really just gives you a sense of how we would position it in the overall sanctuary, both in advance and following the installation of the perimeter net. Now, again, these are renderings, they're drawings, and they're not in perspective. It's very difficult to give you a clear perspective of an image like this as to exactly where the bay pen will be positioned, but that's roughly where it would be. And we're now going through all of the geotechnical work to specifically identify the location for the bay pen that we would first welcome the whales into. So with that, perhaps we go to the next slide, Lori, and give you another view of that same bay pen. This really is more of the design drawing from the fabricators and the designers that are working on this for us. And we work with them every week. They're proceeding with all of this, and currently they're particularly working at what are the forces that will be on the bay pen from waves, from currents, and from tides, as well as in storms. So in order to do that, they're using the data from the hydrodynamic modeling that we created last year and the year before, both with side scan sonar and with LiDAR studies, to really understand all of the forces, including through 2 hurricanes that have been in the area over the last few years. All of that data goes into designing how we anchor this in place. And so they're evaluating the forces that can be on there. They're deciding where the anchors will be and what types of anchors we may use to keep it in place. We want it to be stable, and certainly the medical lift in the middle and that structure adds stability to the bay pen. But at the same time, we want it to move so that it's not so rigid that it's caught in place in very difficult weather. So this gives you a sense of the spacing of it, some of the activity that we can do in it for these animals. And really, not only is it a place for Wikie and Keijo to acclimate to the environment in the sanctuary, but going forward, it will also be a place for other animals to be in once they're out in the whole sanctuary. And it will always be an environment to use for animal husbandry, because it gives us such access to the animals. You can see in the picture on the right, there are some images of where the gates will be for them to move in and out, both out of the overall bay pen, as well as from the bay pen into one of the isolation pools as needed. And obviously the animals are already trained for this kind of work in Marineland. And, you know, as we talk about that, it's important to remember that nothing like this takes place without collaboration with the current team of animal care staff at Marineland and the government of France, as well as our team. And we would look forward to having people from Marineland come to Nova Scotia to work with us. And certainly in the early days, once a decision is made, our team would join with the team in Marineland to first do a complete medical evaluation of Wikie and Keijo, then to continue to really work hand in hand in preparing them for transport and for movement to a new environment. So all of that is part of what would happen going forward once the government of France makes a decision. Now, also, it's important to remember that there are a number of different plans that have been put forth. So ours is one expression of interest that we have put in place, but there have been others as well, and we want to mention those. So with that, I just want to note that one of those plans that we've heard about is from one of the environmental groups and advocacy groups in France to actually keep these orcas in Marineland, providing that the facilities are upgraded. So that's one of the expressions of interest that has gone in. Another is for a sanctuary to be built in northern France, in Brittany, in waters there, and to create a sanctuary for them in that environment. Now, we don't yet know whether that's a feasible plan or not, but if it is feasible and it can be built as an authentic sanctuary to provide the level of care that's necessary for Wikie and Keijo, we've told the government that we would certainly stand ready to assist in that plan if at all possible, because the most important thing is that Wikie and Keijo go to sanctuary and not go to a facility, a small aquarium in Japan or potentially in China. All right, so with that, why don't we move on to the next slide, just to talk a little bit about some of the work that's been going on site over these last months. So on the left, you're seeing one of the drilling rigs that's been on site really quite frequently, doing test pits and the like, but most recently, this was used in the northwest section of our site to do the test drill of the test well for our potable water, because we'll need fresh water for our staff, for our kitchen work and the like. So we've been doing testing as to where to place that well, so it's most effectively to provide gravity feed down to our environment where our buildings will be and most of our activity will be. Now, this next week, what will be happening on site is we'll have geotechnical engineers on site doing multi-beam sonar throughout the whole environment, the 100 acres of water space for our sanctuary. Now, the purpose of that is really to understand the overburden, as they call it. That's the space, the amount of soil between the surface of the subsurface of the ground beneath the water and where we reach bedrock. So whatever the depth of that is will dictate the types of anchors that we use to hold the bay pen in place. Now, among the types of anchors we're considering are on the left, on the lower corner, you've got kind of a Danforth, which is a dredge, a drag anchor, an embedment anchor. You also in the upper place have a dead weight anchor. These are the type of anchors we used in Iceland for the bay pen at Kletsvik Bay. Those were many 10,000-pound dead weight anchors that held that bay pen in place. And we're also looking into the use of the pin piles that you see on the right corner of the screen. So these are the options that our engineers are considering, and we'll have more data to make that selection after the geotechnical work that is being done next week and will be evaluated in the coming weeks. So this is all going on simultaneously right now. And then in addition, and we go to the next slide, we have our architects and designers working with us to position where our permanent buildings will be. Now, in our expression of interest, we've really looked at two options. Because we're looking to bring the animals in 2025, it's possible that we would use temporary quarters or temporary structures initially. But our architects and designers who've been looking at this with us over the last few months believe that we can actually build our permanent structures by that time. So again, like the earlier pictures, this is not a final design. This is not exactly where the buildings will be, but it does show you the area of the sanctuary grounds, the lands that we're purchasing, where we will position most of our staff work, our veterinary care building, our animal husbandry building, the security staff quarters, and our net loft and marine operations. All of that will be roughly in that location in this area of the lands that we're purchasing. Now, the positioning of these buildings is dictated by where we have the appropriate land for them, where the wetlands are on the site, because you have to have a certain amount of setback from the wetlands, and we have quite a bit of wetlands in this area. So these positions that you're seeing here do allow for all of the appropriate setbacks. And then, as I mentioned, our potable well will be up in the northwest corner of our site. and our septic system will be in the southwest corner of the site. So all of that work is being done now by civil engineers on site and by our designers and architects to give us a sense of where we want to position the buildings and where we want to do our primary work. So just so you understand, with the accelerated plan, all of these consultants are working simultaneously every day. So with that, I just want to mention that, the things that we have to do going forward at this point is provide the Crown Lands survey that it really provides Crown Land, provides the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables with information as to all of the history of the lands and waters of ownership and the like. That's part of our responsibility to provide them with that information. We're doing all of our land side management plan for how we'll use the site. I think many of you already know that certainly this is an area that historically had gold mining. So over the last year and a half, we've been doing additional environmental work to know everything about that land, where the gold mines were, what remaining residue there is of any elements. And of course, we have identified that. I think you've seen it on our website and in our reports. We have some arsenic embedded in the land. So how do you treat that? It happens in many places throughout Nova Scotia. So our land management plan describes how we'll use a layer of soil, gravel, or concrete over the areas where our buildings will be and where our land activity will be. And that plan goes to the Department of Environment and is reviewed hand in hand with them for them to understand the approach we're taking to effectively use the land. Similarly, we're doing a marine environmental plan to describe how we'll be using the marine environment. And that also goes to the Department of Environment over these next months as the consultants finish that work. So we've understood everything we can about the environment. And one of the questions we keep getting is, well, why don't we release the studies that we have? Well, we have the raw data in these studies, but the raw data isn't what helps to describe and make the plans for the land and the use of the marine environment. That has to be interpreted by experts. And those are the experts we've been negotiating and discussing with. How do we make this plan most effective to utilize the lands and the marine environment for the staffing and for the animals? And the experts determine how to evaluate the data in the environmental work that we've drawn. And that's what goes into the plans. And I have to say, with all of these consultants we've been talking about, none of them believe there are risks to the animals from any of the data we found, nor risks to how we will use and manage the site going forward. So as we go forward, we've got to continue to conduct the mapping of this area. And one of the key areas of that is mapping eelgrass, because we do have eelgrass throughout this marine environment. Not in all of it, but in a number of areas. And there are some interesting things about eelgrass. It really does show you the health of the environment. And through the work we've done with Dalhousie University and with our own project manager, Alexandra Vance, many of you may not know, but Alexandra is a bit of an eelgrass expert. Her master's degree research papers were on eelgrass. So she's been diving the area along with the folks from Dalhousie University to map the eelgrass. And what we've learned from it is that this is a very healthy crop of eelgrass. So that shows you, as well as all the studies we've done over the last couple of years evaluating the water column, how healthy the water column is. Now, the other use of the mapping of the eelgrass is to designate where we put our nets, because eelgrass is a species of concern in Nova Scotia, and we have to avoid interfering with the growth of that robust crop, that robust flora. So luckily, in our case, it's not where we plan to have our nets, but that's part of the mapping that we're doing again this spring and early summer to be sure we know exactly where the eelgrass is.
And I wanted to just add to that, Charles, since you mentioned the water column, the water in this site is pristine. It is clear, it is clean throughout the water column, and we were really pleased to get those findings.
So with that, Lori, and you'll see a little bit of the same in the next slide, you can see some of the underwater pictures of the eelgrass, and we've done underwater photography throughout the whole area. And again, this next week with the geotechnical work that'll be going on site, we're again doing multi-beam sonar and underwater photography of the whole 100 acres. And so what happens next? And how does this project actually get completed? So many of you asked about the permits, and of course we do submit all of the data to the Department of Environment and to the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables. But the actual final decisions about opening the sanctuary for use come from a process through the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables to the whole cabinet, to the provincial cabinet. And the provincial cabinet actually finally approves the project. So that's the process we're going through now. With the work that we will get from the geotechnical engineering next week, and that information being provided to our site engineers, we're able to describe all of the benthic impacts. What do we mean by benthic impacts? The impact of those anchors on the subsurface. How much soil will they move? How much impact will they have on the soil, both where we anchor the bay pen, as well as where we anchor the perimeter net. And then we provide that information to the Department of Natural Resources and Renewables, and also to DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, because they're interested in benthic impacts and the impacts on the flora and fauna. Alexander and I met with them a couple of weeks ago. We described where we are. They've provided us the kinds of questions they have about that, and all of that data will be provided to them as our engineers finish determining the specific anchors that we'll use for the bay pen and the barrier net. And then the other permit that will be needed as we go forward is that DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, has to approve each animal that would be coming into Canada from a foreign environment, from a different country. So we would need individual permits for each animal that comes to the sanctuary. So that gives you a broad overview, and I'm sure there'll be questions that we can answer about it, but that gives you a broad overview of the process going forward to where we are now. Lori?
Yeah, thank you. One of the things I wanted to mention was the fact that while we are confident that we can meet all the requirements, if Wikie and Keijo can come to our sanctuary, there is, of course, always a measure of unpredictability because of the fact that the French government has to make that decision. The other thing is that a lot of questions have been coming in about, well, how come you keep shifting the time when you say you're going to be finished? And the reason is because no one has done this before. And so like any groundbreaking project, any unique project, there are things that come up and we don't know exactly how long things will take because we are depending upon other entities as well in the mix. So just to let you know that we are always trying to meet our goals, and this is the kind of mission that involves a lot of unpredictability, but we are confident that we can bring whales on our accelerated plan if we're honored to be able to do that by the French government. Now, as I mentioned, the decision, to bring Wikie and Keijo is not in our hands. We've put in our submission, but we are also in conversation with other entities around the world because we are the only sanctuary in the world that would be able to have both beluga whales and orcas. And we remain in conversation with a number of people around the world for belugas. For the past few years, we have been discussing two belugas, Bella and Luvi, in South Korea, who are living in concrete tanks. Luvi is at Lot World, Bella is at Aqua Planet, and I believe it's in a mall. There's been a lot of publicity about Bella lately because of her circumstances, but we've been in touch with a lot of people in that area, including the people at the actual facilities. And we're in ongoing talks with them about the possibility of bringing Bella and Luvi to our sanctuary. There are also belugas in Taiwan at the Taiwanese National Museum of Marine Biology, and they would like to bring their belugas to sanctuary. So we are hoping to have more discussions with them. And then there are about 34 beluga whales still left at Marineland, Canada, just up the street, as I like to say. And while we have been in conversations with them in the past, we haven't recently, but we remain hopeful and open to conversations with Marineland Canada so that we can do the best we can in a collaborative fashion for as many of those beluga whales as we can.
And one thing I might add in respect to Marineland Canada, Lori, is there have been announcements that new owners are taking over that park in June. And
Yeah,
hopefully that new ownership group, that will open up the possibility of conversations with them. So I think what Lori's pointing out is, yes, we have a focus on being able to respond to Wikie and Keijo, but the accelerated plan is as valuable in helping us move forward for any of these animals because they're all in need.
Yeah.
And animals in every one of these parks are in compromised health, and they all need help, whether it's these we've mentioned or others that you've been asking about and we'll speak to as we get to answering your questions.
Yeah, Shemank is one of them, who is an orca in Argentina. And you know, we are open to conversations about how to help him. We really want to go where whales are in need and do what we can for them. Now, even though cetacean sanctuaries are new, it is really growing. There are a lot of sanctuary projects in the mix globally, around the world. And for the past few years, we've had the honor of working with the National Aquarium in Baltimore and Sea Life Trust and Merlin Entertainments. Both of those organizations are creating sanctuaries. National Aquarium for bottlenose dolphins, Sea Life Trust for beluga whales. And we've all worked together in a very unique collaboration to create something that never existed before. And what is that? Set of accreditation guidelines for cetacean sanctuaries. And those guidelines were adopted by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries last year. And these guidelines are important because they help the public distinguish between authentic sanctuaries and just places that call themselves sanctuaries but are not really. And it's also a way for the Global Federation to assess sanctuaries that come online, just like they do with elephant sanctuaries and big cat sanctuaries, and to accredit those who meet the rigorous standards of an authentic sanctuary. Now, I also want to talk about our work with the Jane Goodall Institute. Charles and I are members of the Cetacean Committee, and we've worked with them on their testimony, giving them advice for their testimony to the Flemish government, because there are dolphins in Belgium that were going to be moved, but they're not now. But we were advising the Jane Goodall Institute Cetacean Committee in their testimony to the Flemish government about how to make life better for the dolphins. And of course, we endorse the fact that they should be retired to a seaside sanctuary. At the end of February, Jane Goodall wrote a letter to the French government asking them to retire Wikie and Keijo, the two orcas in Marineland Antibes, to our sanctuary in Nova Scotia. And we're really grateful for that and really appreciative. So as our work accelerates towards welcoming the first whales, whether it's Wikie and Keijo or belugas, we are committed to one thing. And that one thing is to bring an end to the exploitation of these animals in concrete tanks in entertainment parks around the world. We're committed to working with others to make this happen. And we look forward to a future where there are no more healthy animals in concrete tanks. They're all in sanctuaries. And then eventually, these animals are living where they evolved for tens of millions of years, in the ocean, where they're adapted and really where they can thrive. So I want to thank you for joining us on this update, and we can take questions.
One of the questions I thought I'd jump to right away. I think I'm smiling about it because it's such a good question that I didn't think of when we were talking about the scale of the orcas to the bay pen. And so are they smaller or larger than they are in the photo? They appear much larger in that photo than they would be with respect to the size of the bay pen. They would be much smaller in the image if it was to scale. So I kind of thought that was obvious, but in fact it's not. So I really appreciate that question and wanted to jump to it right away.
Yeah, we've got a lot of questions, so we're just going to move through them and get to as many as we can. We have about another 15 minutes, so we'll try to answer as many as we can.
Again, please put your questions in the Q&A when you have them. We're not able to call on people live during this, but again, one of the questions is, where were Wikie and Keijo's captured? They are from the Norwegian Icelandic orcas. That where their parents, Wikie's parents, were captured, and of course, Keijo is Wikie's son.
One of the questions here from a student that I recognize: what are the opportunities that might be available for researchers, students, veterinarians once we're up and running? And what are the steps one should take to prepare to participate in such a project? Yeah, there's going to be lots of opportunities for veterinarians, for pre-vet, for veterinary interns, for science trained students and others, and so forth, and people to actually help maintain the environment of the sanctuary. So there'll be a lot of opportunities. My advice about what you should do is continue to do what you think you love to do and get the very, very best training you can, because there will be a variety of ways that one can participate in such a project.
And one of the questions that kind of moves from what you've just been discussing, Lori, is what is the staff at the sanctuary going to be? So will there be animal care staff and veterinarians? And the answer to that is yes. We have a full staff of animal care team members who are experienced in caring for the animals. We will have a full-time veterinarian on staff, as well as marine operations personnel, net care staff. We have to clean the nets on a regular basis. Our marine operations staff does that. We have full-time 24/7 security, both at the outset and then going forward throughout all of the time that the sanctuary will be there. We'll also, of course, have some administrative team and the like. And this is a staff of about 20 people that will be on staff on site at all times, caring for the animals. And through the kinds of training that Lori just described, these are positions that will be available as we move forward. And as I mentioned earlier, we would always hope to bring staff from a facility that the animals are coming from, because that staff has developed trust with the animals. The animals trust them, the people trust the animals and know them. And that's critically important as we move forward with any group of animals. So that's why the collaboration with the team that's with them now is so important.
Yes, yes. I think we already mentioned this, but we'll just mention it again. Someone asked for an update on Marineland Canada in Niagara Falls. And we've heard through the grapevine and publicly that they may be changing hands. We stand ready to sit down, have a real conversation with whoever the new owners are, or even the existing owners, so that we can do right by some of these beluga whales that they have. And our understanding is that there are about 34 left and 5 bottlenose dolphins.
One of the other questions here is, at what stage do you reduce human contact with the animals? Our objective is to provide as much independence for the animals as we can. Now, at the same time, there will always be a level of human contact, both for their feeding, because certainly they will continue to be fed much the diet that they have been. In this case, salmon and herring, along with capelin, are the primary diets that the orcas have been on. So that would continue. And so you want to introduce them first to the bay pen, then to the whole environment. Want to make sure that there's enough engagement with the whole environment so that they're using more and more of it. So they swim further distances, that they use their ability to dive more deeply than they've had in other locations. So all of that happens over time, and will provide enrichment for them throughout the whole environment so that they begin to use it. And they will dictate how much of that is independent, while they're still certainly working hand in hand with the human people who are there to care for them. So they won't have complete independence. There's certainly not enough fish for them to capture all of their diet within an environment in a sanctuary. So there'll always be contact with humans. There'll always be care for them, but they'll have a much larger environment and much different kinds of enrichment from the natural flora and fauna, the waves, the storms. All of that is stimulating for them in every way.
There is a question about how we will maintain security at the site. You might want to talk about the fact that we will have 24/7 security force. We will have a zone where no one will be able to come close to the nets. And we will have underwater and above water cameras and hydrophones, eyes on all the time, 24/7, 365.
And Laura mentioned this is one of the only sanctuaries, certainly the only one currently being developed, where we could have both species of orcas and also belugas.
Mm-hmm.
Someone mentioned, how can they be together? Well, they wouldn't be. With 100 acres, what we have is the ability to divide that space such that orcas could be in one area, belugas could be in another. And that's the only way there would be more than one species in the environment. Similarly, even within the bay pen, we have the ability to divide that in half and could have 2 different species in it if that was necessary. So all of those are part of the precautions that are already designed into the overall sanctuary plan.
There's a question or two about what we will be feeding the whales, and will they be eating fish on their own?
I think as we just mentioned a moment ago, that our plan would be to maintain the diet that they've had. Mm-hmm. In the case of the orcas, that's frequently, and in this case, salmon, herring, and capelin. And
Mhm.
we will certainly provide that fish to them, and we'll maintain the diet that they've had. The other thing that happens in marine parks is a tremendous amount of supplements, vitamins, and the like are given to them. Now, certainly with Keiko, with Wikie and Keijo, we don't yet know what supplements they've been on, nor precisely what their diet is. But over time, what you'd hope to do is to reduce the number of supplements that they've been on as that can happen. And you do that very gradually. Any changes in their diet or in their supplements or in their vitamins is done under the supervision of cetacean veterinarians and done very gradually. Another question I see here is, what are the acoustic levels in the waters in our sanctuary area? Well, we've done a complete acoustic environment with hydrophones, an acoustic study of the environment with hydrophones already. This is an area where there is not much traffic. There are a couple of lobster boats in the area that have been there for decades, and there is no major shipping or anything of that nature. So it really is not an environment with a noise that impacts how the animals will live. And as Lori mentioned, we will have hydrophones in the water at all times to kind of give us a sense of any noise that's coming in, but also equally important to record the vocalizations of the animals that are in the sanctuary, so we can learn more about their vocalizations and can be ears on as well as eyes on to what's going on within the sanctuary.
Yeah, I mean, this is called passive acoustic monitoring. And there are all kinds of really interesting research questions that can be addressed just doing things in that way. And we have lots of researchers who want to work with us. And all of this is really important because we want to understand how these animals' behavior changes and how their communication systems change once they're out of a tank and in a more natural environment. And this is a unique opportunity to learn about that. So we're very excited about that kind of research being brought to the sanctuary.
One of the other questions that's a little bit far afield from what we've just been discussing is, do we know anything about what's happening with Naya in the Muscovarium in Moscow?
Yeah.
And so that's a very difficult situation. She is alone in that tank now, and certainly there have been reports of the people in the aquarium wanting her to be moved. What I can say is that we have been in contact with a number of the people we worked with in 2019 when we were there to help release all the 87 belugas and 10 orcas that had been captured illegally, and those were all subsequently released. We've been in touch with some of the same people that we were working with then, and I can say that there is now an effort to create a sanctuary in Russia for Naya. I don't have a lot of information about how far that's gone. I haven't heard anything new in the last 10 days or so, but I am in contact with one of the key individuals trying to bring that about, and there is effort to do so. And so I think that's a tremendously hopeful activity. And as we learn more, we'll certainly share it. But I just want to reassure people that there are people in Russia working on behalf of Naya and trying to move her out of that aquarium.
There is a question here about how many whales can we house at one time. And we've estimated that if we, for instance, had orcas and belugas, perhaps 2 to 3 orcas and about 6 to 8 belugas. Now, some combination thereof. And the reason, and we might be able to stretch that a little bit more, but we can't stretch it that much more. And the reason is because we don't want to exceed the carrying capacity of the site. And what that means is that we want to make sure that the water flushes through with all those whales pooping in it, and it's kept clean. It's our responsibility to do that. And we certainly don't want to crowd the animals in as well. So we've calculated pretty much how many animals can be there at a given time, given the flushing rate of the water and the site geometry, for 6 to 8 beluga whales, 2 to 3 orcas at most. And if we don't have orcas, we can have more beluga whales.
Another question there, a number of people have asked about how we would transport whales to the sanctuary. In this case, in the case of France, in the case of where most of these animals are, they would be transported by plane. And so that's work that is been done by many of the marine parks around the world. Certainly our team has been involved in transport before, the transport of Keijo to Iceland, that I was privileged to be on the plane with him. Jeff Foster was instrumental in that transport. So there's quite a bit of experience that we have in that regard. And there's a complete transport plan that's part of the operational plan that we've provided to the French government and that we've built into our planning going forward.
There's an important question here that I do want to address. The question is the long-term goal to be a tourist attraction? So people can see the whales in their natural habitat. So let's address that, because it gets right to the heart of what an authentic sanctuary is. No, we are not a tourist attraction, and no authentic sanctuary is a tourist attraction. So we don't have a business model that has people coming through turnstiles to look at the animals. So we're not going to be that kind of a facility. We're going to be a place that prioritizes the welfare of the whales, period. That's what an authentic sanctuary is. Now, whether people can see the whales in their natural habitat, there are places at a distance where we're looking at right now where people might be able to see the whales in the sanctuary site from a distance, perhaps with scopes, where they can actually see the animals. We're also going to have underwater streaming. So, and that's pretty exciting, because you can bring that anywhere to a museum or a classroom, and people can check in to see what orcas or what beluga whales do when they're actually in an environment that affords them the ability to investigate things and be curious. So there will be many, many ways that people can come to know our sanctuary residents.
Another questions that a number of people have asked is, what's the financial situation? Always want to answer and respond to that question, because it's critical that public support continues. So this is a multi-million-dollar activity proposition, and $15 to $18 million, particularly with this accelerated plan, which is a little more expensive than the plan that we would do if we weren't doing this in the accelerated way that we have described. So we have raised, we had a commitment for over $5 million that we've been working. In the last month, we've raised another $1.5 million. So we are continuing to raise these kinds of funds. There's no question that simultaneous to the work that we have been describing in this webinar, we need to be equally attentive to raising the rest of the money. And one of the ways this tends to happen is really key individuals that are, we call them almost angel donors, like the $5 million donor that we have. These are the individuals who really bring forth the funds for the capital funding, the construction of the bay pen, the construction of the perimeter net, the buildings and the like. And then our annual funding is what sustains the project over time. Adoption of the animals, as has happened in the land-based kinds of sanctuaries throughout the world. And that's what we anticipate moving forward. So this is a philanthropic effort that continues for the life of the sanctuary. And that's the structure that we put in place financially. We're continuing to have conversations and discussions with foundations, with individuals who can support this level of funding. And we're optimistic that we will bring that forward. And that's a critical element, just as all the construction work, all the engineering, all the environmental studies that we've just described. And it is critically important that it continue. And we hope that those of you who are with us today will continue to help us. Many of you are donors already. We appreciate everyone who is able to support us and help us going forward, because the financial part of this is as important as any other part. And without your support, we cannot do it.
Yes, so I'm very grateful.
A couple other questions here, a little bit about Miami, what's happening. I think you've seen in a lot of the news that there have been efforts by the Miami-Dade County to close the Miami Seaquarium. And certainly they have been in touch with those of us who were in Miami Seaquarium last year to see if we can help if that is what happens. And certainly that's going to be a need to rehome all of those animals if that park and when that park is closed. And certainly we would look to be helpful in any way we can there as well as elsewhere. So certainly as those conversations continue, as we're called, and certainly we've been in touch with the county about that, we would look to be helpful in every way. Also, I just want to remind people, the accelerated plan talks about the bay pen, and we've emphasized that because that's the pacing item at the moment. But by no means is that an end game. That is an interim spot where the whales would be as we install the rest of the perimeter net.
Yeah.
So it's helpful. They would need acclimation to the environment in a way, in a smaller space in any case. This is almost in many ways considerably wider than a US football field, and in many ways longer. It's longer and larger than a football field.
Mm-hmm.
It's not as deep as other areas of the sanctuary, so they can't dive as deeply as they can in other parts of the sanctuary area. And we would look within 6 months of their being there, 6 months to a year, to have all of the rest of the facilities fully built. So by no means is this an end game for them to be in a bay pen. It's a temporary spot that allows us to meet the deadline of having them out of France by 2026, and allows us to move forward with building the rest of the sanctuary. And we have to have the funding to do it all, because you can't do it just halfway. You've got to be able to do it all.
Right.
And that's clearly what our intent is and what we're working towards at the moment.
Yes. And I'll just mention also, because there's been a question about whether we will ever release the whales. No, our plan is to care for them for their full lifetime. The reason that sanctuaries are necessary is because you cannot just take these animals and throw them back in the ocean, because they don't have the survival skills. So what we're trying to do here is give them the best of both worlds: human care, feeding, but in a natural environment. And so they would be with us for the rest of their lifetime. There's no breeding, so there's no overcrowding, and all of those things. So I just wanted to mention that as well. So
also, I just a couple other questions. I know we're running over and don't want to keep you longer than the time we mentioned, but is there a plan for orcas who might not be compatible with one another? I think, as we pointed out with the bay pen, and with the way Lori described our ability to divide the sanctuary into other areas, all of that kind of concern can be handled by allowing the animals to have separated space. But also, one of the things about a space this size compared to where they've been is that part of why animals in captive environments, in marine parks, have aggression toward one another is that when there are elements or issues about which they may not be compatible with one another or may not get along, there isn't space for them to move away from one another.
Mhm.
And in a sanctuary, there is. So not only do we have the space where they can figure things out for themselves, but we also have the space where we can divide it up as necessary to make sure that we're providing them a safe space for each animal.
Yeah. I think that's a good place to end. I want to thank everyone for their incredible questions. If you have any other questions, you certainly know that you can reach out to Charles, reach out to me anytime. We answer all the questions. And we really want to thank you for joining us this evening, and hope to see you again in our next update. And please share this with everyone you know. So thank you so much.
And we have recorded this. It will be on our website in the coming days. And I just want to join Lori in thanking you all, and great to, in some ways, see you and have you see us and join us in these questions. Thanks again, and especially thank you for all your support.
Be well.